Hola, me llamo Sally, soy inglesa. That's about all I know, apart from ¿Dónde está la biblioteca, obviously. So welcome to Adventures in APIs. I'm at Justafish if you want to tweet at me or send things to me on the internet. So who am I? I'm a senior technical architect at Lullabot. I used to do full-time Drupal development until last year. Now I spend half my time waving my arms around, pretending to be Jeff Eaton, and telling people how they should architect their sites, as well as the content strategy that they should use. And then the other half of my time, I spend writing lots of JavaScript apps and consulting on how other people should build those, particularly in decoupled environments, which is my favorite thing at the moment. When I'm not doing that, I'm actually moonlighting as Wonder Woman. So what we'll cover today, we're going to look at what decoupling is. We're going to see what tools that we have available for decoupling, mostly in Drupal, but we'll see what else is out there in the world as well. We're going to see what our friend competitors are up to. Well, I think frenemies might be a better word there. We're going to see what's difficult when we're decoupling Drupal. We're also going to touch on the subject of internally decoupled. You might have seen a few articles floating around about that lately, and then maybe we can have a little discussion amongst ourselves at the end of your thoughts and what you think the next steps with this should be. So what is decoupling? Decoupling is when we only use Drupal for the content management tasks. Drupal is fantastic at managing content. The entity system, the field API is all fantastic. Things it's not so good at might be things like the theme system and other like layouts, things like that. So we're going to build the front end with all the latest and greatest tools. And then when we decide that we need to redesign, we can throw that away and build a different front end. Or if we're doing multi-channel publishing, we can build tons of front ends. So we can have a front end for the Xbox, we can have one that lives on your browser. Maybe your fridge needs to know about your blog. So this is where decoupling really, really shines. Yeah, that's it. So is this all theoretical, or have you actually done it? I have actually done this. So the first decoupled site I built was in 2012. It was a sports ball site that I can't tell you the name of, but I worked on their Drupal CMS for about a year and a half. And then at the end of that project, they said, we want a mobile site. And the mobile site is going to give us all live updates for all the games that are happening, because lots of them would happen throughout the year. So we built that. It was purely in JavaScript, which in 2012, let me tell you, was interesting. And that worked out really great. We built custom API endpoints onto Drupal 7 to do this. I'm not sure they're still using it anymore. I don't know. I'd have to check on that. And then in 2013, I worked on MSNBC. That was a partially decoupled site. So if you go there now and load the site, Drupal will respond to you, but lots of blocks and even full sections of the site are actually built with Angular. So we built custom API endpoints for that one again. And that was built with Angular. It's still running, so you can go and check that one out now. We did all kinds of interesting things, like embedding Angular templates inside panels blocks, so that the JavaScript framework would pick up on that, so we could use Drupal to populate it with initial data, and then start updating it with JavaScript as you navigated around the site. Some sections of the site we even just completely did away with Drupal, and it's all just JavaScript applications. And then in 2014, I went to work for Hotwire. I don't know if anyone's heard of that. Is that a thing over here? Nope, okay. So you go to Hotwire and you put in where you want to go on holiday, and it gives you all these hotels. And they're called secret hotels because you don't necessarily know what the names are, but you know what area it's in. So the idea is to give you cheaper prices. And they decided to do a fully decoupled architecture, and they selected Drupal for its content management strengths. So we went in and worked on the content architecture for it. We built them a prototype for their CMS and built all of their API endpoints. And then another team came in and were working on the front-end Angular app at the same time as us, and we sort of met in the middle and everything worked, and that was great. In 2015, we decided to rebuild lollabot.com, and we decided we wanted to do a fully decoupled site so that we could see what all the problems would be when we're building these architectures, and then we could take this into our client projects as we went. It was quite a long endeavor, it turned out, because we discovered many problems with decoupling, but we got over them. We launched the site. It was all great. We learned tons, and that's still running now, and you can go and check that out. I'll talk about the architecture of that a little bit more later. Right now, I'm involved in several decoupled projects. I can't, unfortunately, talk about them, but I will say more and more of our clients are coming to us interested in building these kind of architectures. And one of the things that's really nice for them is that there's a whole pool of JavaScript developers and front-end developers out there, and we can start to use those resources. So finding Drupal talent can be kind of hard, especially for these really large enterprise sites. So now we have this whole other universe of people that we can come and build sites with us. So that's been really good for us. So what tools do we have available to help us decouple these sites? Well, in Drupal 8 core, we have REST endpoints. Has anyone used this in Drupal 8? Anyone? One person? Okay. Go check it out. It's really great. Works really well. You can get all your data in XML, JSON, and HAL-JSON. You can create, read, update, delete all of your entities and all the associated fields. HAL-JSON is an interesting one because it lets your API be more discoverable. So when you hit an API endpoint, it gives you a link to itself. It'll also give you a link to any embedded resources. So say you've got authors, it'll say, if you follow this link, you can go and find out more about the author and get all the fields associated with that. If you're doing pagination, so say you hit the API and you want all your latest articles, it will actually give you a link to the next page of articles instead of you having to guess what it would be. So that's really helpful. Sorry. And then it also provides two forms of authentication. They're not the best, but they are the easiest to implement. One is basic auth, like you go in, type your username and password. And the other is cookie authentication, so you would have to be authenticated with Drupal in the usual manners, have your cookie stored, and then you could use some of the protected APIs, because obviously we don't want everyone in the world to come and start updating our content, because that would be a disaster. In fact, there was a Drupal security issue 2 weeks ago where the user endpoint, you could start, if you had an authenticated account, you could update user 1 via your REST API and change the password. So that wasn't the best. So do make sure you lock down your APIs if you do decide to do this. So this sounds great. So it kind of sounds like we have all we need to build our decoupled sites already in Drupal. So let's say you get put on this site. You get given the BBC homepage from yesterday. Oh, wow, CIA plots. Interesting. Okay. So all right, we decide we're going to build this in a fully decoupled app. This is only even like a third of the page. The whole thing is huge. So let's see if we can decompose this down into the different endpoints that we might need, which are there. So I saw 5 on this one in particular. They're highlighted in blue. You'll notice I highlighted one in yellow, which is the weather, because I decided that actually we can get that from a third-party API. We don't have to go back to Drupal for that, which is one of the great things about doing decoupled. So actually, if you registered for this camp, you did something similar. I think you used Eventbrite for integration with tickets, which is fantastic, especially for things like this where you don't necessarily have this huge team of developers available to you who want to write and maintain an event system that's going to take payments and hand out tickets. It's just not feasible. So integrating with third-party APIs like that is a really great thing to do. If someone else can specialize in the weather, you don't need to reinvent the wheel for that. So it seems up here we have an endpoint for featured articles. We have an endpoint for our latest news. We have one for sport. We have editor's picks, which is probably something someone drags and drops on the back end. And then I think that's business news, although it's a bit blurry, but something like that. So that's all great. So we go off, we build our app, we add our 5, 6 different endpoints in, we hand it over to our boss. He says, this looks great, but then he tries to load it, and it's all pretty slow because we've actually ended up making 5 different requests to fulfill this page. And if this was the actual BBC homepage, we'd be making like a ton more, because this is only a little part of it. So, okay, we see this, and we decide that we're going to turn on, well, no. Okay, so we see this, we decide we're going to make a monster endpoint just to cover the home page, and it's going to give us all the APIs that we need for this in one request. So we make that, homepage speeds up, it's all great, we're super happy, and then we move on to working on a different part of the website. Boss comes back, the landing page is slow as well, she says. So, okay, we'll build another of these monster API endpoints that globs together things. And then the next week she says the home page needs this other block, can you add this in? And about 2 months later, your whole API is a big pile of spaghetti and you don't understand it anymore, and you have all these custom endpoints all over the place, and it's a complete nightmare to maintain. Has actually happened to me. So that's terrible. In the meantime, HTTP2 got lots of support in browsers, so okay, let's get rid of all our custom endpoints, and we decide to turn HTTP2 on. Has anyone here used it? Know what it is? Okay, cool, a few people. So HTTP2 allows us to to have the heaviest part of the web request only done once. So we need to contact the same server 5 times, so we can do all the negotiation once. We keep that connection open and persistent. We can get all of the endpoints at once, and then we close the connection off. So that's great. We can stream all those in. So we turn HTTP2 off. We get rid of all our custom endpoints. We think everything's going to be great. We load the page. The sports section loads in first. We're looking at that, and then the news section loads in, and the whole page like scoots down to the bottom, and then the top loads in, and everything starts jumping around, and we're back to where we started, and that was super annoying. So that didn't really work out for us. So what do we do now? We actually have lots of things to help us. If we look in Contrib, we have several modules. The most feature-complete one now is JSON API, which is written by Matteo, who's from around here, I hear. Apparently he lives in a tiny town. It's called JSON API. It's impossible to Google because it has such a generic name, but it's drupal.org/JSON_API, I believe. So what JSON API does, it allows us to have all those custom endpoints, but we can have them in a more flexible way. So we don't have to manually specify what all of these are. It allows us to get lots of resources at once. And all the things that are related to them, we can all get them in one request. Another similar project to that you've probably heard of more is GraphQL by Facebook. They had similar issues, so they created this spec. The difference between them is that JSON API is an open standard. You can go and contribute to it, whereas GraphQL being in Facebook, slightly less so, but it's all on GitHub. You can still contribute to it. There's a GraphQL module for Drupal. I don't think as of now it's quite as complete as JSON API, and you do need a little bit of manual work to get it working, but it does kind of work, and that's really great. With GraphQL as well, there's a lot of tooling available in JavaScript to help you deal with it. So there's the Relay project, which dovetails with the React. There's Apollo as well, lets you fetch all this data at once. Really great. Adjacent to that, we also have the OAuth module, which allows us to do, I was going to say easier logins. They're not easier for us to implement, but for your users, they're much easier to use. So you know the thing where, so-and-so would like to authorize this application on your account. That's what we can do with OAuth. I think that's another Mateo module. Simple OAuth works really, really well with JSON API. In fact, pretty much anything Mateo is contributing to right now is amazing and all to do with APIs. So just go visit his D.O profile, and you can see all the cool things he's working on. One of the things I'm really excited about is there's some API discoverability tools. So not only do we have our API, we can hit an endpoint and say, can you tell me about the article? So we hit this endpoint and it says, okay, an article has all of these fields, and one of them is the title, and the title is a string, and it's 255 characters long. And this is great because now the people designing the APIs don't have to keep continuously writing and updating documentation, because that never happens. And I don't have to keep going back to my back-end developer and saying, hey, what's in this API? What am I going to expect? It's all there for me to see. Also, one thing that's just started being worked on is an API distribution of Drupal 8. So you can install Drupal 8 and get all of these great API tools by default, so you'll be ready to go for building your decoupled apps. There's a GitHub, Drupal HTTP APIs. Oh, that's a mouthful. And there's a node on Drupal.org as well. If you want to come and get involved with that, please do. It's very exciting. Another option, which is what we ended up doing on Lollabot.com, although it does complicate things quite a lot, is to take all of your nodes, and as you save them, you compact them down into one JSON object. So on Lollabot.com, when we save a node, we have transformers that say, this is how you turn an article into one object. And then we take that object and we put it in a document database. In our case, we're using CouchDB, but you might be more familiar with something like MongoDB. Just lets you take these big JSON strings and keep throwing them at databases. That has its challenges as well, for sure. So trying to relate documents together can be really hard. Whereas with JSON API, we can just say, hey, can you give me the author object at the same time as you give me the article object? That gets a lot harder with this kind of model. But there is a lot of really interesting tooling that's available for it. So for example, we use PouchDB, which is a JavaScript library that interfaces with these databases, and it syncs documents as you go. So theoretically, you can go on the Metro here, is that what you call it? And when you lose signal, you could still be clicking around the site and reading articles that have been stored in your local database, which is very clever and very cool. I think the one you're probably most familiar with is Twitter. You know how you can, I don't think they use PouchDB, but it's something very similar. How you can write a tweet and it will tweet it out when you leave, or you can still kind of interact with the app. It doesn't stop working just because you've lost your internet connection. So what are our frenemies up to? We're not the only CMS in the world, unfortunately. We haven't reached world domination yet. The most famous example of decoupled architectures is probably Calypso. Has anyone seen this on WordPress.com or heard about it? A couple of people? Okay, great. So WordPress.com decided to decouple their architecture. They called it Calypso. It's a JavaScript application built with React, so you can log in and you can maintain and write posts for all of your WordPress.com blogs from this decoupled app. So you could build an app to interface with your WordPress.com blog as well. You could do it on your phone, your laptop, wherever. WordPress.com has a REST API which supports this. You can do many sites at once with Calypso. It's really fast. It's really cool. All the changes happen in real time. I would say, impressive as this is, we can build this with Drupal right now. So the thing about WordPress.com is that its content model, compared to the things that we're trying to build with Drupal, it's not quite so rich. So they're not trying to handle lots of complicated things like we are with workflows, multilingual, all that kind of stuff. So if you wanted to build something right now, we can do this with Drupal. There's a few other open source CMSs which are sort of interest to me right now. One is called Keystone. It's written in JavaScript. It has a field API, very similar to Drupal. It has a proper SDK, and by that I mean when I'm writing a Node application, I can just do require or import Keystone, and then it's part of my application. So I'm bringing Keystone into my application. Keystone isn't my application that I then try and build around. Unfortunately, to do that, it's a very manual setup process. If you go to the Getting Started page, there's a lot of like, copy this in here, write this file. It's tricky to get going with, but there are a lot of benefits to doing that because you have a lot of control over everything that you want to do. The other cool thing it does is it will auto-generate React components for the fields. So we could design a node, has a bunch of fields, type a command, and it creates an admin UI for us on the fly. Super cool. It's definitely something that we could think about doing with Drupal. It doesn't use a relational database, so it doesn't use anything like MySQL. It's built on Mongo. So again, that comes back to some of the problems that we might have with relating complicated bits of data together. So it's not trying to do everything that Drupal does, but we can definitely look to it for some inspiration. The other one I see a lot of people using is Django CMS, written in Python. It has a REST API available. It's not built in. It's not 100% there yet from the last time I checked. There's only a couple of people working on it. Again, not trying to do so many complex things as we are. But one of the things that is interesting and that is on their roadmap is that they want to add a headless managed mode. So they want to be able to configure everything in Django CMS via a headless interface. So that goes beyond just like, you can update your node. It'd be like, you can configure all of your fields through these interfaces. Again, they're really great, but we should remember that what we have in Drupal in terms of API is quite staggering compared to some of these other CMSs. So that was really nice to see, actually, because when I started doing research for this talk and seeing what other people had available, I was really, really pleasantly surprised for how far ahead Drupal is compared to some of these other things available. So the other thing we can look at is proprietary CMSs. Sorry, those logos look terrible, but look how colorful they are. Yeah. So you might have heard of Contentful. That one's quite popular right now. Some of these are hosted, some of them you buy licenses for, but it's still worth keeping an eye on what these people are doing. There's a table here. I won't go through it all because that would be super boring, but if you want to look at the slides and refer back to this later, you can see what they're up to. As you can see, like Contentful is probably the one that's doing the most right now. I included an extra line for Drupal 8 for what we could achieve when we install all of these extra contrib modules, and we basically get feature parity with Contentful. So you'll notice I added a column for preview support there. We can't really do preview all that well in Drupal right now, but if we move over to a decoupled architecture, we can do cool things like this. And I'm going to try and do a live demo, and it will go horribly wrong, but I pre-recorded it just in case. So this is our CMS, and we weren't able to access it earlier because of the VPN. So that doesn't work. Great. Okay, so oops. I don't know if you can see that. So this is what we do on our site right now. So we're able to have these two communicating. This is our front end, this is our back end, and we can do live preview as we go. So I don't know if you can see that going bold. We can add images, and it works. I forgot about that. Yeah. So this is the kind of thing we can achieve if we decide to go decoupled. It's really great. People love using it. We have a secondary preview system on top of this as well, where you can save revisions and share them out to people. So you could say, do you think article A or article B works better? Yep, okay. I can hear lots of mumbling. I don't know if that's good or bad. Yeah. Cool. All right. So if that doesn't sell you on decoupling, I'm not sure what will, but okay. So what's difficult when we decouple? As we mentioned, authentication can be really tricky. Many requests to get a full picture of the content. We can kind of solve that with Contrib, what we have now. Documentation, that's being worked on. That's getting a lot better. Tooling and SDKs. There's a project called Waterwheel that's open source. It's on GitHub. It's a JavaScript library that allows you to interact with Drupal's REST APIs and JSON APIs a little bit easier, because although we all know how nodes work and all the weird little Drupalisms that we have, front-end developers who've never seen Drupal before probably don't know what a node is. So it somewhat abstracts some of the Drupalisms away, which is really nice to work with. API documentation we touched on. Routing I'm going to talk about a little bit, because this was actually by far the hardest part of writing decoupled applications for me. Because we have to decide which side of the equation is going to handle the routing. So do we let the back end handle it like we normally do? So usually when you build a site, you install Path Auto, you set all that up, you request something from Drupal, it figures out what the path is, gives you the right thing back, it's all good. But when you do a hello world on, say, React Router or something, the first thing it tells you to do is start declaring all of these paths and then matching components to paths to react to what they are. And so we need to reconcile those two things. Either we just kind of set path as star and we go off to Drupal and we figure out everything, or we have a partial decoupling when it comes to routing. If we decide to leave all the routing to Drupal, then we need to have some kind of endpoint on Drupal that's going to translate URLs into actual pieces of content for us. There's no one answer to this, and it's very much going to depend on your application. Also, if your application is going to go out to multiple places, then is the routing going to be the same in both places? Internal links can also be a problem. So, you're in your WYSIWYG, you make a link somewhere. Is it going to say node/1234? Well, if it does, then we need to transform that on the front end, because the front end's not necessarily going to know what node 1234 means. So does that mean we have to make a web request for each item that's in our rich text that comes out? But that's going to be very slow if we do that. So we have to think about those kind of problems and what we're going to transform there. And then redirects can also be a problem. So let's say you have partial control of the routing, thank you, on the back end. Then you change that. Then we need to tell the front end that this URL doesn't exist anymore, but actually we don't want to lose all our Google juice, so we want to shift that over to somewhere else. One of the things we did on lullabot.com, actually, I don't have the internet, so I can't really show you very well, but we have a tree system. So the editors can specify this bit, which is the slug, and then we have an entity reference, which goes up to our articles node, and it composes the URL based on all of these individual slugs that come together to make everything. I wish I had the internet, because it would be a lot easier to show you, but if you want to talk to me about this afterwards, because we're running a bit out of time, I'd be more than happy to show you. And then in our API, we have this endpoint that you can hit, and you get the entire document back based on that URL. So in our router, we just have a big old star. Any URL that comes in, it goes off to Drupal and figures it out. Drupal will also tell us if there's any kind of redirects or anything that needs to go there. If we do this decoupled architecture, no layouts. So you can't use blocks, you can't use panels, you can't use any of those things because they're not going to have any meaning on our front end. What you can do is use something simple like a drop-down to select what kind of template is going to be available to the front end to use. This actually does force you to think a lot more about your content model, which isn't a bad thing at all. So, for example, instead of having these things in your CMS that relate to certain areas on the front end of your site, so you might have a field that says right column, you might want to think a little bit more about what that actually means as part of your content model. So actually, it could be featured articles, and it might appear in the right column on this design, but when we redesign later on and we throw the front end away, they might appear on the left. So that would be something we wouldn't want to do anymore. Just to touch on one last subject, internally decoupling. So this is all great. It's slightly different from what we've talked about, and I've added a little flame here because a bit controversial, I guess. If you go into the ideas queue, there's an ideas project on Drupal.org. I've written a little bit more about this. The idea with internally decoupled is we start to break down the components of Drupal. So you could have a Symfony application, and in your Symfony application, you could pull in the entity API and the field API, and then you could build your own JSON API on top of that, or whatever other kind of application you want to build. And you could just pull in the bits of Drupal that you actually want to use. So with these architectures, we probably don't want the theme layer anymore, in which case we just pull in those bits that we actually need. That starts to get really interesting because, and I'm just going to add a little troll face here because I'm slightly trolling you when I say that these modules that we start to bring in don't necessarily have to be written in PHP anymore. We can start to bring in modules from other things that aren't Symfony or PHP, which is really exciting to me. I think I'm running out of time, so I can't talk about this anymore. So I will say thank you. If you want to come and argue with me on the internet, so I'm at Justafish. I love talking about this stuff, so come and talk to me about it. Thank you. Any questions? Yes. If you have any thoughts as well, they don't have to be questions. I would love to hear them.
Wow. Enlightening talk. Thanks.
Thank you.
Could you please extend on the last part on the flames in the internally decoupled? Just a random thought. Might this be something like we can deconstruct Drupal into chunks of functionality and reveal them freely in other languages than PHP?
Yep. Yeah, so I think this is a really interesting idea because then at that point Drupal becomes a collection of all of these modules. We pull it together with Composer, probably comes with a theme, all kinds of stuff. And most people will probably use that. Site builders could use it, that would be great. But if you wanted to start doing things a little bit more complicated, so things like the theme system might actually get in the way of what you're trying to do, you could manually start pulling in all of these separate Drupal modules to use. So, I mean, there's been things where it's like, I just really wish I had the entity system and the field API and nothing else. Yeah. So if you check the ideas queue, I've like written a small essay on it.
Yeah, really?
Yeah, you can check it out there. It's still a bit sort of pie in the sky right now. So
okay.
Yeah, but a few other people have actually written some articles about it in the last month or so. I think Tim Millwood wrote one and Dave Hall wrote one, so you can find them and check them out.
So just joking, but it's kind of we go more onto polygamy rather than endogamy, right?
I guess so.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions or thoughts? Come on, someone must have a question. There we go, one.
Is that really
Yeah, that was really Jeff Eaton in his younger days.
I asked if that was really Jeff Eaton that she
was.
showed the picture for.
Yes. Every year on his birthday, his mum just dumps a load of photos on Facebook now, so it's like my favorite time of year.
How you handle search engine optimization with because Angular and React is.
Yeah, so one of the reasons I like to use something like JSON API that I can get my request in one is that with React you can do server-side rendering. So if you're trying to make lots of requests on your application, the server-side rendering actually gets really hard because then you're not sure which of those requests you actually need to render on the server first before you spit that out. If you have the 1 mega request, you can fill it all out on the server, deliver it, and then React will actually pick up on everything there, and then the JavaScript application takes over. So yeah, that's not so much of a problem. One other thing, though, that's just occurred to me is images can also be an issue, because with Drupal, we're used to having image styles, right? So we can upload an asset, and then on Drupal we say, over here, I want it to be this size as a thumbnail, or use a picture element even and have stuff like that. So that's another thing that's tricky. You might need to write some kind of service that lets you fetch images by a specified width, or you might want to just give it out to a third party. There's like lots of services that you can throw images at, and they'll give you back any kind of sizes that you want. Did that answer your question? Okay, great. Yes.
Yeah, thanks for the talk. Especially the demo about the preview was pretty cool. How does it actually work? Because first you said that when we save the nodes in the Lulabot blog, we kind of push them to CouchDB, but there you weren't even saving anything, and that was kind of a backend form, I understood. So what is going on under the hood?
So we actually have 2 preview systems. One is the one I didn't show because the internet's not working, so I can't. One preview system saves everything to a separate preview version of our database so that we can share links around that have different revisions. The second one that you saw actually uses a massive hack with local storage and iframes, and it's pretty ugly underneath, but it does work. So every time you're typing stuff in, it's taking all the things from your form, it's squishing it through the converters that we have for all of our nodes to get those flat JSON objects, and it's pushing it into our front end, which can then transform it into what you see there. Yeah, it was the actual building the preview thing. Once we got the architecture of our site worked out, actually turned out to be super easy because we decided to use these JSON objects to get everything from. So that worked out for us, but obviously does have its drawbacks too with trying to relate data together. Okay, cool. Find me afterwards if you have more questions or thoughts. I'd be more than happy to talk to you about it. But yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure.